elections mean for us. And looking at that is our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie. A very good morning to you. I hope you had a good weekend.
Good morning, Peter. Good morning to the viewers and the listeners. I had a quiet weekend. Grateful for that. Ready for the weekend, the show.
Right, so much happened. I'm not even sure where to start, but I guess Cote d'Ivoire, the elections there, they happened, and I just wonder, in the end, whatever comes out, is that a reflection of the will of the people?
I don't think it's particularly a will of the people, and I think if we start with the democracy score, if you look at Freedom House and other institutions, which basically try to rate democracies around the world, it's scoring at 49 out of 100, which is a fail, basically, to simplify, because there are a variety of things there which don't reflect democratic interests, democratic will of the people. And we are going through a very weird period in Africa. We're seeing this extension of gerontocracy in Africa, gerontocracy, where we have a lot of these 80-year-olds, some approaching 90, some in their 90s, who are running these countries. And we do see some of that as well globally. But I think the African case study is unique because of the median age of the population. So if you look at now, the president going into a fourth term, it all looks as if Ouattara will continue with this particular administration going into a fourth term at the age of 83, when the country right now has a median age of 18.3. That's very ridiculous. I mean, that's a 60-year plus age gap. So when you think about that, then the questions become, can a person of that particular generational outlook really represent the interests of people who are turning 20 as a nation, quote unquote? Not really, because median is a median mark, not necessarily the ages of everyone. But still, if you look at that in and of itself, it's something that's a cause for concern. It just in terms of what do we want from representative democracy. Then, when you look at the other factors, namely that neither of the two main opposition parties leaders were allowed to run. Former President Bagbo could not run because he was sentenced, and it was a weird sentence because of burglary. That was alleged to have been committed by him in the 2010-2011 post-election crisis. So he was eliminated, meaning that his party, the Party for the African People, was excluded. Then you have Tijan Tiam of Cote d'Ivoire's Democratic Party. He was also disqualified for taking too long to renounce his French citizenship. So when you look at the reasons that were preferred and some of the machinations which happened, you can't really make the conclusion that this election was free and fair when somebody has basically self-dealed and tried to eliminate both of his key rivals to make the path easy for him. So you got the issue of the constitutional amendment, you got the issue of gerontocracy, you got the issue of the exclusion of opposition leaders, and then you have this issue as well of just how they have been assessed by these international bodies to perform in terms of democratic standards, Peter. I don't think that we can say that it was a free and fair election, if we're being honest.
What could be the consequences? I mean, this is a country that had a bloody civil war, and the two main characters were Bagbo and so what might happen, do you think?
I think the unfortunate consequence, and it may not be an immediate consequence, because this power grab, the fourth term, the kind of history that we're discussing with the Civil War, is that you may find that there's a situation where we end up in a coup or with military taking a bigger part. And this is what we've been seeing happening in other African countries.
Talking about other Talking about other African countries, I'm curious about Tanzania. They go to the polls, and everything that we've described has played out there as well, where the opposition are eliminated one by one.
Yes, Peter, there's big similarity in some of the democratic trends in Africa because we've seen this the same. Samia was supposed to be President Samia Suluhu was supposed to be somebody who was this woman who was going to really remodel leadership in Africa. We've always been hearing variations of we want to see women on top, and unfortunately, she has been doing what they call dominating in a male-dominated field because instead of actually being democratic, instead of actually, changing the shape and tone of leadership since she took over after John Magufuli's death, she has been more repressive than even John Magufuli was. I think at various points, social media was shut down on in Tanzania. I think now at a certain point, X or Twitter, whichever you prefer to call it, has been shut down. And as things stand right now, the main opposition, Chadema and ACT Wazalendo, are boycotting this election. Speaking about the crackdown on free speech, we even saw that there were various interventions. I think at some point she was even, arguing, or her administration was arguing with bloggers from Kenya. So when you look at the length and breadth of it, the democratic standards in Tanzania have not necessarily improved. And when you then actually think about the conditions, was there, I think, 2 years ago, and having conversations with Tanzanians, they actually said, in many respects, they preferred John Magufuli because he was trying to put, for instance, put roads in the townships and put roads in areas which typically do not have roads, whereas the elite of the party were actually saying that no, we don't need to provide roads for poor people. We don't need to provide roads in rural areas and townships because these people, they're not used to roads. They don't have roads. And we've actually reverted back to that same system now under President Samia, where there is a lot of development in key areas, urban areas, metro areas, but not necessarily in the neighborhoods and the communities where people live. So Tanzania remains a country which is a conundrum because it's very safe, it's very beautiful. You can see a lot of economic activity when you go there. However, access to money remains difficult for the people, and the poverty line remains extremely high. And even though there's all of this economic activity, and I think it's in part because the distribution of resources to the bottom remains something that is a challenge. But I don't think we can say that this is going to be a free and fair election or an example of democracy in Africa. Unfortunately, our continental institutions have been hollowed out or deliberately remained hollow. So we're not necessarily going to see any real action unless there's a coup. It seems as if the AU and these other structures are more willing to say, no, we oppose coups, but anything else, they seem to be very reluctant to actually take a stand and provide leadership.
Yeah, very sad story. Julius Nyerere must be turning in his grave with the human rights abuses that are taking place in that country right now. All
Yeah.
right, you talked about geriatrocracy, putting old people in charge. Okay, I'm going to learn how to say that word. Djibouti's parliament has unanimously voted to lift the constitutional age limit for presidents in the country, currently set at 75. They are changing it so that the current president, Ismail Omar Gule, who's 77, can run in next year's elections. Isn't this the same story running across the continent?
Sometimes, Peter, I get almost, I feel like we're not trying to do sunshine news because these stories typically don't paint the continent in a good way. But I think at the same time, it's not us who decided that, the president Ismail will do this and try to then open the pathway for himself to run again. And it continues to be a challenge, right? Is that we see these older leaders, and we haven't even spoken about Cameroon, where Paul Biya, if he even is of a sound mind and body, is still trying to be the president at 93 or 92, whatever age he is. So this continues the trend where these old leaders who have the institutional authority and sometimes the networks continue to want to remain in power. And this is what I think we're seeing also in Djibouti. The parliament voting unanimously for this shows me that, we are in dictatorial territory here. And really, the public don't have as much of a say. And as much as though on social media, they've actually said, that they're not happy with this. but it's a country where freedom of speech and freedom of the media and press are severely restricted. We're not going to see a lot of the public sentiment. We're not necessarily going to see protests as a result of this. It's a power grab. It's a power grab that has been endorsed by parliament so that they can say, and this is what the new African dictators seem to be doing across the board, is they go through these, rituals of pretending as if what they are doing is somewhat democratic, because then they can go to the institutional bodies, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, and say, no, but my people voted for this. But I think it's for democracy when you have these machinations to the exclusion of the people. But another challenge, another country with another person who's going to be well in their 80s, possibly looking for another term of office after this, because once they do it once, they'll do it again.
Namibia President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah has removed her Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Industry, Mines and Energy, bringing that ministry under her control. Is there something going on with the Deputy Prime Minister, or is it the Ministry of Energy and Mines that becomes so important that she needs to bring it into the presidency? And then why remove him as Prime Minister? What's going on?
It's unclear at this point, and I'm still trying to look at further reporting to see how the story develops much further. But it is clear just from the factual matrix we have before us that the deputy prime minister has lost the favor of the president. For Nantangwe to be removed in this way and sent back to the benches of parliament, I mean, that in and of itself is a message within the party and to the people of Namibia that she is unhappy with his performance, particularly because if it was just an issue of mines and energy and industry, I think that she would have then split those portfolios and maybe put the industry and mines into her side without necessarily removing him altogether. So it's either there was an issue of difference of opinion where he was refusing to subordinate, or it's an issue where there has been a breakdown in the relationship and she no longer wants him in the cabinet in any shape or form. But as you said, issues of industry, mining, energy continue to be issues which occupy the political ranks and the elite ranks of Namibia, because there are plans to do crude oil production by 2030. There's uranium, there's diamonds, which are coming out of Namibia. So there's a lot of interest in those resources. And sometimes we've seen that the scandals, if you remember the fish rot scandal, they come from these types of ministries. And perhaps something is brewing in the background. And the president decided that, to rather than go through another fish rot scandal, it's better for her to have a direct line of sight of everything that is happening in those particular cabinet positions. A few leaders do this around the world. And sometimes I think it is useful when they do it. And sometimes I worry about too much power sitting in one particular place. But because Namibia is a relatively smaller country, maybe the president will be able to give a better direction, better vision, and better execution of her wishes into, minerals and energy, and be able to then execute in that way. But the story is still developing, but it was quite a surprising story, especially considering some of the scandals which have come out of Namibia's cabinet in the last few years, Peter.
And in less than a minute, Madagascar's former president, Andre Rajoelina, has had his Madagascan citizenship stripped because he acquired French citizenship in 2014. Big question is this of any consequence now? Will there be unrest, political tensions, or by and large, Madagascans are saying farewell and cheers for coming, but don't come back?
Yes, I think it's a major au revoir from the people. They are saying to him, we were aware of this thing of you getting the French citizenship. If you are in France, stay in France. I think the public has rejected him. We saw the protests. We saw the, new leadership being sworn in. And I think at this particular moment, the questions are really going to be, how does Madagascar transition to democracy, as opposed to, does Rajoelina have a path back into, the democracy? He has been rejected. I don't think he has a pathway to come come back. So it's au revoir from the people. They're saying to him, enjoy croissants in Paris if that's where you are, but there's no future for you as the president of the country.
And that's where we'll leave it for this week. My dear brother, have an awesome week ahead.
You too, Peter.
That's our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie, making sense of some of the big stories that played out in the week that was. When we hear that music, what does it mean?